I'm Andrew Byrne. I am the descendant of convicts and the Gunai people of East Gippsland in Victoria. So the thing we need to think about with contemporary Indigenous theatre, first and foremost, is that it's written by a First Nations playwright. It will have First Nations characters, it will tell First Nations stories, it comes from the perspective of First Nations people, and often history, culture and political events that have happened in the lives of First Nations people in Australia.
I'm Jane Harrison. I have Murrawari heritage from northern New South Wales, so I grew up in Victoria and lived here all my life. Contemporary Indigenous theatre, that's a big question because we're not a homogenous group of people who all think, feel and write the same way. There's a whole range of different theatre practices. But basically it's theatre that's been developed and on the themes of First Nations lived experience, and so that can take a range of different themes and topics, and really it doesn't have to be even centred around Indigenous themes if it's written by a First Nations person.
My name is Jacob Boehme. I'm a Narungga and Ghana artist from South Australia, but living and working here in Melbourne. Contemporary Indigenous theatre can be whatever we want it to be.
The Cherry Pickers in 1968. It was the first time where a play blended together traditional First Nations storytelling and culture with Western theatrical practices. What was special about The Cherry Pickers was it was written by an Aboriginal man, Kevin Gilbert, and it was one of the first plays to be presented to the Australian general public.
We can go back to 1972, we can go back to Redfern, where there was a political movement, the Black Power movement that was coming out of Redfern at the time, was employing street theatre to get its message across to white Australia. And so out of those protests came, and the Black Power movement, came the National Black Theatre.
There's been some amazing First Nations plays in recent history, including Andrew James's Yanagai Yanagai, which I think was just a beautiful piece about an important part of Victorian history. Conversations with the Dead, which had a huge impact on me, by Richard Franklin. 7 Stages of Grieving by Wesley Enoch and Deborah Mailman. That was another significant play.
All which give mainly white Australian audiences a window into the Aboriginal experience, but also proof that every experience is individual and different.
What's the purpose of contemporary Indigenous theatre? Well, I think as in all theatres, there's many purposes. You know, there is the purpose to entertain, there's the purpose to educate, there's the purpose to share stories and to share culture, and to, I think in some playwrights' intention is to bring non-Indigenous people into the story.
Well, I suppose the one thing that theatre in general does is it tells stories so that we can understand ourselves more in the world, our place in the world. That's, I suppose, for me, what theatre's function is and has always been. It's a communal practice, so we come together as a community, we sit, we listen, we might even be lucky enough to sing along. It's ceremony really, and what it does do is it teaches you the values, the morals, the questions of life that you and we as a society question and grapple with. For the Indigenous contemporary theatre industry sector, I suppose it's our way of contributing to those questions that Australia needs to be, or Australians need to be asking of themselves.
So I think for you young people, It's really important that you have access to Indigenous themes and ideas and get some insight into the lived experience, because it's our shared history. There is no history of white people in Australia without the black presence, and there is no black history in the last 230 odd years without the white presence. And so we've got to find ways to talk about those intersections of black and white storytelling. Black storytelling is so broad in its styles and genres. So there can be narrative plays, there can be post-traumatic plays, and everything in between. Yeah, it's as wide as there are storytellers, I think. There's something for everyone.
Well, I think if you ask a First Nations playwright what contemporary Indigenous theatre is, they might say that it is nothing, that they don't write in a style called contemporary Indigenous theatre like we talk about in schools. But you know, in education, we often categorise style when we're exploring plays.
I don't know that we could call contemporary Indigenous theatre a style yet. As a form, it's really only 50 years old. So I think at the moment there's still a lot of discovery, still a lot more experimentation to happen, and a lot more kind of documentation of what's been done, what is working, what's not working, in order for that to become a style.
There's often a sense of family in First Nations plays. There's often traditional storytelling, the use of traditional items like the use of ochre or a ceremonial dance. There's often stylised movement in First Nations theatre, and the use of direct address, emblematic or symbolic costuming or set design that often has relations to the land.
I think country is really significant in telling black stories. I think all of us have relationships to country that we want to express, so that you young people can engage more readily with place and country yourselves and understand the significance of it for First Nations people.
When you go to see an Indigenous theatre performance, I really, with all honesty, don't think that you could say that there's anything uniquely Indigenous about the presentation, because basically once you're in a theatre, you're conforming to Western theatre conventions and methodologies. So to me there's nothing uniquely Indigenous about it other than the person who wrote it and the person performing it.